The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when Maya Thompson arrived at her boutique, Elegance and Grace, nestled in one of the most prestigious shopping districts. The early morning light filtered through the large display windows, casting soft shadows on the carefully curated collection of designer clothes and accessories she had spent years building. The quiet morning was Maya's favorite time of day. It gave her a chance to prepare the store meticulously before customers arrived, something she had done religiously since opening 3 years ago. She moved gracefully between the racks, adjusting a sleeve here, straightening a handbag there, while humming softly to herself. The spring collection had just arrived, and she wanted everything to be perfect for the launch event scheduled for later that week. The store itself was a testament to her journey. From a small online business run from her apartment to this beautiful brick-and-mortar space that celebrities and socialites now frequented. The interior featured exposed brick walls, crystal chandeliers, and vintage mirrors that created an atmosphere of sophisticated charm. Every detail, from the plush velvet seating to the antique display cases, had been personally selected by Maya. As she was arranging a new window display, featuring a stunning emerald green evening gown, she noticed movement reflected in the glass. A police cruiser had pulled up outside, its lights off but engines still running. Maya didn't think much of it at first. Police cars often patrolled this upscale neighborhood. She continued with her work, carefully adjusting the dress's fabric to catch the morning light just right. The bell above the door chimed unexpectedly. Maya turned, surprised since the store wouldn't open for another 2 hours, to find Officer Richard Collins standing in her doorway. His hand was resting on his holster, and his face wore an expression that made her stomach tighten. She recognized that look. It was one she had seen too many times before, a mix of suspicion and presumption that had nothing to do with any evidence of wrongdoing. "Ma'am, step away from the merchandise," he commanded, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that brooked no argument. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." Maya's heart began to race, but years of dealing with microaggressions had taught her to keep her composure. She stood straight, her shoulders back, and spoke with the quiet confidence that had helped her build her business. "Officer, I'm actually the owner of this establishment. I'm just preparing for today's business." The officer's expression didn't change. "Anyone can say that. I'm going to need to see some identification and proof of employment here." He took a step forward, his body language clearly conveying that he didn't believe her. Maya felt a familiar mix of emotions: frustration, anger, hurt, but she kept her voice steady. This moment, she knew, would require the same strength and dignity she had called upon throughout her entrepreneurial journey. The security cameras silently recorded everything, their red lights blinking steadily in the corners of the ceiling, bearing witness to yet another incident of prejudice disguised as procedure. The morning had started so peacefully, but now Maya found herself standing in her own store, being treated like an intruder in the space she had created through years of hard work and determination. The irony wasn't lost on her, that just a few feet away hung the magazine feature celebrating her as one of the city's most successful young entrepreneurs, yet here she was, being asked to prove she belonged. Little did Officer Collins know, this moment would become more than just another story of bias. It would become a catalyst for change in their community. But for now, Maya stood her ground, her hand reaching for her phone where she kept photos of her business license and ownership documents, preparing to prove, yet again, that success knows no color. The gentle hum of the store's heating system and the ticking of the vintage wall clock filled the tense silence as the scene continued to unfold. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware of the small drama playing out behind the pristine windows of Elegance and Grace, where a woman was once again being forced to defend her right to exist in a space she had created. The tension in the boutique grew thicker as Maya calmly reached for her phone, her fingers slightly trembling despite her composed exterior. Just then, she heard familiar voices outside, her employees arriving for their morning shift. Through the glass door, she could see Annie and Preya, both carrying their usual morning coffee cups and chatting animatedly. When they walked in, their smiles quickly faded as they took in the scene before them. Their beloved boss, standing near the window display with a stern-faced police officer whose hand hadn't moved from his holster. The morning sunlight that usually made the store feel magical now felt harsh and exposing. "Good morning, Maya," Annie called out, deliberately using her boss's name. "I brought those fabric samples you asked for yesterday." Her voice was cheerful, but her eyes conveyed concern and understanding. Priya, who had been with the store since its opening day, immediately stepped forward. "Oh, officer. I see you've met our owner. Maya's been featured in last month's Business Monthly. There's actually a copy right here on our coffee table." Officer Collins' expression flickered slightly, but he maintained his authoritative stance. "I still need to see proper identification and proof of ownership," he insisted, though his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. Maya pulled up the photos on her phone, her business license, store documentation, and even pictures from the store's grand opening ceremony where she'd cut the ribbon alongside the city mayor. "Here you go, officer," she said quietly, her dignity intact despite the humiliation of having to prove her right to exist in her own space. As the officer scrolled through the evidence, more employees began arriving for their shifts. The morning preparation routine had been disrupted, and a small crowd of workers gathered near the entrance, their presence a silent show of support for their employer. The security cameras continued their silent vigil as Officer Collins finally began to realize his mistake. His face reddened slightly, and his hand finally dropped from his holster. The morning sun now highlighted the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. One of the newer employees, who had just started last week, whispered to her coworker, "Is this really happening in 2024? The whisper, though quiet, seemed to echo in the tense atmosphere of the store. Maya's phone buzzed, a text from her sister asking about their planned lunch later. The normalcy of the message contrasted sharply with the absurdity of the moment. Here she was, a successful business owner, having to defend her presence in the space she had built from nothing. Outside, regular customers were beginning to notice the police car parked in front. A few familiar faces peered through the windows, their concerned expressions adding to the growing audience of this unnecessary drama. The morning that should have been filled with excitement about the upcoming spring collection launch had turned into yet another example of the challenges Maya faced as a business owner of color. But she stood there, elegant in her designer suit, every inch the successful entrepreneur she was, refusing to let this incident diminish her achievements. The vintage clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each moment of this confrontation. The crystal chandeliers she'd carefully selected cast dancing lights across the floor, creating an almost theatrical setting for this all-too-real scene. The racks of carefully curated clothing, each piece personally selected by Maya during her buying trips to Paris and Milan, stood as silent witnesses to her success and dedication. A delivery truck pulled up outside, the morning's fresh flower delivery for the store's signature arrangements. Regular life was continuing around them, even as this small drama played out inside elegance and grace. The contrast between the normal morning routine and this unexpected confrontation made the situation feel even more surreal. Maya could feel her phone buzzing again in her hand, probably her event planner calling about the spring launch, but for now, she remained focused on the officer before her, waiting for him to acknowledge what everyone else in the store already knew, that she belonged here, not as an intruder, but as the creator of this elegant space. Officer Collins finally lowered his phone, his demeanor shifting noticeably as the weight of his mistake settled in. The morning light now seemed to spotlight his discomfort rather than Maya's designer displays. His earlier confidence had crumbled, replaced by an awkward uncertainty that filled the boutique's elegant space. Everything appears to be in order," he stammered, trying to maintain some semblance of professional composure. "We received a call about suspicious activity in the area, and I was just following protocol." His words hung in the air, feeling hollow against the backdrop of what had just transpired. Maya's employees had gathered in a protective semicircle behind her, their morning routines forgotten. Priya was still holding her untouched coffee, now gone cold. Annie had her phone discreetly pointed towards the scene, though Maya noticed and gave her a subtle head shake. She didn't want this moment shared on social media, at least not yet. The flower delivery man stood awkwardly by the door, arms full of fresh peonies and roses meant for the store's signature displays. The sweet fragrance of the flowers drifted through the tense atmosphere, a strange contrast to the scene unfolding before him. Maya gestured for him to come in, determined to maintain some normalcy in this surreal situation. Protocol, Maya repeated quietly, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that made everyone in the room pause. Would this protocol have been followed if I looked different, Officer Collins? She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried across the store with clarity and purpose. The security cameras continued their silent recording as a group of regular customers gathered outside, their morning shopping plans interrupted by the unusual scene. Through the window, Maya could see Mrs. Chen, who visited the boutique every Tuesday, pressing her face against the glass with concern etched on her features. The tension was broken by the arrival of someone new, the owner of the coffee shop next door, Mr. Patel, who had noticed the commotion. He walked in confidently, the bell chiming above his head. Maya, is everything all right? I saw the police car and got worried. His presence added another layer of community support to the scene. Officer Collins shifted his weight uncomfortably, his badge catching the morning light. Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience, he began, but Maya raised her hand gently to stop him. This isn't about inconvenience, she said, her voice carrying years of similar experiences. This is about assumptions, about who looks like they belong in certain spaces. She gestured around her carefully curated boutique, where every piece told a story of her journey and success. The morning delivery truck outside beeped as it prepared to leave, its mundane sound a stark reminder of how quickly a normal day could transform into something else entirely. The stack of fashion magazines on the vintage coffee table featured Maya's smiling face on one of their covers. Rising star in luxury retail, the headline proclaimed, seemingly mocking the current situation. Annie stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Our security footage captured everything, just so you know. It wasn't a threat, just a quiet statement of fact that made Officer Collins tug at his collar uncomfortably. The store's phone rang, probably the event planner calling about the upcoming spring collection launch. But for once, Maya let it go to voicemail. This moment, as uncomfortable as it was, needed to be addressed properly. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, making the whole scene feel almost dreamlike. People passing by began to slow down, drawn by the unusual sight of a police officer in the high-end boutique so early in the morning. The crowd outside grew larger, faces pressed against the glass, watching the scene unfold. Maya could see phones being raised, pictures being taken, stories being shared. The vintage clock on the wall showed that barely 30 minutes had passed since Maya had arrived at her store that morning. Yet everything had changed. What should have been a peaceful morning of preparation had become a moment that would spark conversations throughout the community about prejudice, assumptions, and the ongoing challenges faced by business owners of color. The spring collection pieces hung pristinely on their racks, waiting for their debut, unaware that they had become the backdrop for a much more significant moment in the store's history. The morning was rapidly transforming into something bigger than an isolated incident. As Maya stood in her boutique, surrounded by her supportive staff and concerned community members, her phone started buzzing continuously. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood's small business network. The local news had somehow caught wind of the situation, a testament to how quickly information traveled in their tight-knit community. A small crowd had gathered outside Elegance and Grace, their faces pressed against the store windows. Among them were other business owners from the shopping district, regular customers, and passersby drawn to the unusual morning drama. The police car still parked outside had become a beacon, drawing more attention with each passing minute. Officer Collins, now visibly uncomfortable, attempted to salvage the situation. "I'll be filing a full report about this misunderstanding," he said, his earlier authoritative tone replaced by something that sounded almost like shame. The word misunderstanding echoed off the exposed brick walls, causing several of Maya's employees to exchange knowing looks. Priya, who had been quietly organizing the day's appointment book, spoke up. "A misunderstanding implies there was room for confusion," she said calmly. "Our security cameras showed Maya arranging displays in her own store. What exactly was misunderstood?" The flower delivery man had finished arranging the fresh bouquets, their sweet scent filling the store with an odd contrast to the tension in the air. He lingered longer than usual, perhaps sensing that he was witnessing something significant. The peonies and roses he'd brought now sat in their crystal vases, their beauty somehow making the morning's events seem even more out of place. Outside, someone from the local business association had arrived. Through the window, Maya could see her talking animatedly with other shop owners, her gestures indicating she was already planning some sort of response. The community was rallying, turning a moment of discrimination into one of unity. Annie, still holding her phone discreetly, whispered to Maya, "The incident is already trending locally. People are sharing their own similar experiences." She showed Maya her screen, where posts were multiplying by the minute. The hashtag #ShopownerWhileBlack was gaining traction, adding their morning's events to a larger, ongoing conversation. Mr. Petal from the coffee shop next door had taken it upon himself to address the growing crowd outside, explaining the situation and asking them to respect the store's space. His presence was a reminder of how the local business community had always supported each other, especially in moments like these. Officer Collins's radio crackled to life, breaking the tense atmosphere. His supervisor was requesting an update on the situation. As he stepped aside to respond, Maya could hear him struggling to explain exactly what had happened. How a routine check had turned into a potential public relations crisis for the department. The vintage clock now showed that the store's regular opening time was approaching. Maya's employees began their usual preparations, though their movements were subdued, marked by the weight of the morning's events. The spring collection, which had been the focus of Maya's attention earlier, now seemed less important in light of what had transpired. Through the window, Maya noticed a young black girl watching the scene unfold, her mother trying to hurry her along. The girl's eyes were wide with curiosity and concern, and for a moment, Maya saw herself in that child's expression. It was a stark reminder of why handling this situation with grace and strength mattered. It wasn't just about her anymore. The store's landline rang again, this time with a call from the local Chamber of Commerce. They had heard about the incident and wanted to schedule an emergency meeting to discuss implementing new training programs for local law enforcement. What had started as a personal confrontation was rapidly evolving into a catalyst for community-wide change. Mrs. Chen, who had been watching from outside, finally entered the store. She walked straight to Maya and gave her a warm hug, whispering words of support. Other regular customers followed, turning the boutique into an impromptu gathering of community solidarity. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the scene with an almost cinematic quality. The security cameras blinked steadily, having captured every moment of what was becoming a turning point, not just for Maya's boutique, but for the entire neighborhood's conversation about racial profiling and assumption. The transformation of the morning's events continued as Maya's boutique became the center of an impromptu community gathering. The police department's public relations officer had arrived, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors as she made her way through the growing crowd. Her presence signaled that this incident had escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding. Inside the store, the atmosphere had shifted from tense confrontation to purposeful energy. Regular customers were sharing their own stories of similar experiences, turning the elegant shopping space into a forum for important conversations. The spring collection, still waiting to be properly displayed, became a backdrop to this unexpected morning of community activism. Officer Collins stood awkwardly by the door, his supervisor now present and taking notes. The contrast between his earlier aggressive stance and his current demeanor was striking. His body language spoke volumes. Shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, fingers fidgeting with his badge. "We need to address this systematically," the PR officer was saying, her voice carrying across the store. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about preventing future ones." She turned to Maya, her expression professional but sympathetic. "Would you be willing to help us develop a training program for our officers?" The question hung in the air as Maya considered its implications. Around her, her employees had gathered closer, their presence supportive, but allowing her to make this decision. The security cameras continued their silent recording, capturing what could be a pivotal moment for change. Through the windows, more news vans had arrived, their satellite dishes reaching into the morning sky. Local reporters stood outside, speaking into cameras, gesturing toward the boutique. The story was growing, taking on a life of its own. Annie approached Maya with her tablet, showing her the online response. The incident had sparked a citywide conversation. Other business owners of color were coming forward, sharing their experiences. What had started as one officer's prejudiced assumption was unveiling a pattern that could no longer be ignored. The flower delivery man, who had stayed far longer than usual, finally spoke up. "You know, I deliver to every shop in this district," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "And I've never seen the police question any other owner arranging their window display before opening hours." His simple observation cut through the diplomatic language and careful phrases, laying bare the truth of what had happened. Several heads nodded in agreement, including some of the other business owners who had come to show their support. Mrs. Chen, still standing protectively near Maya, shared her own story of facing discrimination when she first opened her restaurant 30 years ago. "But times are changing," she said, patting Maya's hand. "We're not staying quiet anymore." The PR officer was still waiting for Maya's response about the training program. Maya looked around her boutique. At the designer clothes she had carefully selected, the crystal chandelier she had chosen, the vintage mirrors that reflected back a scene she had never imagined would unfold in her store. Outside, the young black girl and her mother were still there, now joined by others who seemed drawn to witness this moment. Maya could see phones recording, social media spreading the story, the community refusing to let this be just another ignored incident. Pariah had begun making coffee for everyone, the familiar aroma helping to ground the moment in normalcy. The sound of cups clinking and quiet conversations filled the space where tension had been just an hour before. The vintage clock showed it was well past opening time, but today was clearly going to be different from any other business day. A local council member had arrived, making her way through the crowd outside. Her presence underscored how quickly this incident had escalated from a personal confrontation to a community issue requiring official attention. As she entered the store, her eyes took in the scene, the gathered crowd, the supportive community, the uncomfortably present police officers. Maya stood in the center of it all. Her boutique transformed into something more than a high-end clothing store. Today, it had become a space for change, a catalyst for conversations that needed to happen. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, now illuminating a scene of community unity born from an attempt at intimidation. The security cameras kept recording, documenting every moment of this transformation from discrimination to determination, from confrontation to conversation about change. Maya took a deep breath and turned to address the PR officer, her decision made. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'll help develop the training program, but on one condition. It needs to involve our entire business community. Real experiences, real stories, real change." Her voice carried across the now crowded boutique, clear and purposeful. The local council member, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "We could make this a district-wide initiative," she suggested, pulling out her notebook. start here and expand it across the city. Around her, heads nodded in agreement, the idea taking root in fertile ground. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Through the windows, Maya could see news crews setting up for live broadcasts. What had started as a painful morning was transforming into something powerful. The hashtag Annie had shown her earlier was now trending nationally, bringing attention to a conversation that was long overdue. Officer Collins's supervisor had pulled him aside, their hushed conversation barely audible, but their body language speaking volumes. The younger officer's face showed a mix of embarrassment and dawning understanding as his superior gestured toward the gathering crowd, the cameras, the community leaders present. The boutique's phone rang again. This time, it was the mayor's office. Priya answered, her eyes widening as she listened. "They want to know if you'd be willing to lead a town hall meeting next week," she called out to Maya, covering the receiver with her hand. The ripples of the morning's events were spreading wider by the minute. Mr. Patel, still acting as an unofficial community spokesman, was organizing the other business owners into a committee. "We need to document everything," he was saying, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he made notes. Every incident, every misunderstanding, every time someone was made to feel they didn't belong in their own space. The young black girl Maya had noticed earlier had finally convinced her mother to come inside. They made their way through the crowd, and the girl looked up at Maya with eyes full of admiration. "I want to own a store like this someday," she said softly, her mother's hand protective on her shoulder. The moment crystallized exactly why the stand mattered. Annie was coordinating with other employees to maintain some semblance of normal business operations. They had customers with appointments scheduled, deliveries expected, and a spring collection launch to prepare for. Life needed to go on, even as they dealt with this pivotal moment. The PR officer was already drafting an initial proposal on her tablet, looking up occasionally to get input from the gathered business owners. The community's response had clearly exceeded her expectations, turning a potential crisis into an opportunity for meaningful change. Through the window, Maya caught glimpses of more familiar faces arriving. Other boutique owners, restaurant managers, shopkeepers. Many of them had their own stories of prejudice and profiling, stories that had gone untold for too long. Today, those stories would finally be heard. Mrs. Chen had begun sharing her decades of experience with the younger business owners, her voice carrying wisdom and determination. "We build something beautiful," she said, gesturing around Maya's boutique. "And still, we must prove we belong here. But today, we prove it not just for ourselves, but for them." She nodded toward the young girl, who still stood in awe of Maya's strength. The vintage clock continued its steady ticking, marking each moment of this transformation. The security cameras kept recording, their footage now destined for more than just store security. It would become part of the training program, a real-world example of the biases that needed to be addressed. Outside, the morning had fully bloomed into a bright spring day. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the crystal chandeliers, sending rainbow reflections dancing across the gathering. It felt symbolic somehow, light spreading, illuminating dark corners, making everything more visible. Maya looked around her boutique, at the space she had created now filled with people united in purpose. The spring collection would have to wait another day for its debut. Today, her store was showcasing something far more valuable: the power of community, the strength of unity, and the possibility of real change. The security cameras blinked steadily, recording every moment of what was becoming not just a personal victory, but a community's awakening to the power of standing together against injustice. As the day progressed, Maya's boutique had transformed into an impromptu command center for community action. The local news crews outside were now interviewing business owners one by one, each sharing their own experiences with profiling and prejudice. The stories flowed, some told for the first time in public, others finally finding the audience they deserved. Inside, the council member had set up a temporary desk using one of Maya's elegant display tables. Her laptop was open, and she was drafting a proposal for immediate police reform in the shopping district. Around her, a group of business owners contributed ideas, their voices mixing with the gentle hum of the store's air conditioning. The young girl who had expressed her dream of owning a store was now sitting cross-legged on one of the velvet chairs, watching everything with wide-eyed attention. Her mother had begun sharing her own experiences as a customer in high-end stores, adding another layer to the growing testimony of daily discrimination. Officer Collins, who had remained notably quiet, finally stepped forward. His face showed the struggle of someone confronting their own biases for the first time. "I need to say something," he announced, his voice slightly shaky. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "I was wrong. Not just about this morning, but about many things." The PR officer quickly pulled out her phone to record his words, recognizing their potential value for the upcoming training program. The security cameras continued their silent documentation, capturing this unexpected moment of accountability. Maya's employees had managed to maintain a semblance of normal business operations, guiding scheduled customers through the crowd to their appointments. These clients, many of them longtime supporters of the boutique, became impromptu participants in the day's events, adding their voices to the growing chorus for change. Mr. Patel arrived with fresh coffee and pastries from his shop next door, turning the gathering into something that felt more like a community meeting than a protest. The aroma of coffee mixed with the scent of Maya's fresh flowers, creating an atmosphere that was both serious and welcoming. The mayor's office had called again, this time to confirm that they were fast-tracking the proposal for a citywide business owner sensitivity training program for law enforcement. The security footage from Maya's store would serve as a powerful teaching tool, showing how quickly assumptions could escalate into discrimination. Outside, more business owners continued to arrive. A restaurateur from down the street shared how she was often mistaken for kitchen help in her own Michelin-starred establishment. A jewelry store owner described being followed by security when she shopped for supplies at trade shows. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of shared experiences. Annie had set up a digital registration system for people to document their experiences, creating a database that would help support the need for systematic change. The stories poured in, each one contributing to a larger picture of everyday discrimination that could no longer be ignored. The young girl's mother, who had remained quiet for most of the morning, finally spoke up. She was a teacher at the local high school, she explained, and dealt with similar assumptions daily. "Our children need to see this," she said, gesturing to Maya and the gathered business owners. "They need to see us standing up, speaking out, making change happen." Through the windows, Maya could see the crowd outside had grown even larger. People held handmade signs supporting local businesses and demanding equal treatment. The community's response had exceeded everyone's expectations, turning a single incident into a movement for lasting change. Mrs. Chen had taken it upon herself to mentor younger business owners, sharing strategies she had developed over decades of dealing with prejudice. Her wisdom, born from experience, added depth to the conversations happening throughout the boutique. The vintage clock now showed it was well into the afternoon, but nobody seemed ready to leave. The spring collection hung untouched on its racks, but today the boutique was displaying something far more valuable: the strength of a community united against injustice. Maya stood in the center of it all, watching as her space became a catalyst for change. The security cameras kept recording, documenting every moment of this transformation from discrimination to determination, from confrontation to constructive action. The sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating a scene of hope and unity born from an attempt at intimidation. As evening approached, Maya's boutique had become the epicenter of a movement larger than anyone could have imagined that morning. The local news had gone national. Major networks were now setting up their equipment outside, preparing for evening broadcasts. The story had resonated far beyond their small community. The police chief had arrived personally, his presence adding official weight to the day's events. He stood in the center of the boutique, surrounded by business owners, community leaders, and concerned citizens as he made a public commitment to the institutional change. "What happened here today," he announced, "will not be forgotten or ignored. It will be a turning point." Inside, the young girl who had watched everything unfold was now helping Annie organize the countless written statements from business owners and community members. She handled each paper with care, understanding even at her young age that she was part of something historic. The council member's temporary desk had turned into a full-blown action center. Draft proposals for new training programs, community oversight committees, and business district reforms covered the surface. Local lawyers had volunteered their time, helping to transform good intentions into actionable policies. Officer Collins, who had started this chain of events, was now sitting quietly with a group of minority business owners, listening to their stories with new understanding. His face showed the deep impact of their words, each account adding to his education of the daily realities they faced. The PR officer had been joined by her entire team, all working to craft a comprehensive response to the day's events. But more than just managing a crisis, they were helping to document a moment of genuine change. The security camera footage had been carefully preserved, soon to become a powerful teaching tool. Mr. Petal's coffee shop had turned into an extension of the gathering, with people moving between both spaces, sharing stories, and building connections. The sense of community had grown stronger with each passing hour, breaking down barriers that had stood for too long. Maya's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Calls were coming in from business owners across the country, sharing similar experiences and asking how they could support the movement. The hashtag that had started locally was now trending nationally, bringing attention to an issue that had been ignored for too long. The young girl's mother, the teacher, had begun organizing an educational component to the initiative. "Our students need to learn about these experiences," she explained, "not just the big historical moments, but these everyday battles for dignity and respect." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the boutique's windows, Maya noticed something remarkable. The crowd outside had organized a candlelight vigil. One by one, lights flickered to life, creating a gentle glow that seemed to represent hope and unity. Mrs. Chen had spent hours sharing her wisdom with younger business owners, but now she sat quietly, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "In 30 years, she whispered to Maya, I never thought I'd see this day. People are finally listening." The mayor had announced an emergency town hall meeting for the following week, but the community wasn't waiting. Plans were already being made, committees formed, and action items assigned. The energy of change filled the boutique like electricity. Through the windows, Maya could see more people arriving, even as night approached. They carried signs, but these weren't angry protests. They were messages of support, unity, and determination for change. The community had transformed an incident of discrimination into a movement of hope. Andy approached Maya with another update. Business owners from neighboring cities were planning similar initiatives, using their experience as a template. The ripple effect was spreading, turning one morning's confrontation into a regional campaign for awareness and change. The vintage clock showed it was well past closing time, but nobody seemed to notice. The spring collection still hung untouched, but the boutique had showcased something far more valuable today: the power of community, the strength of unity, and the possibility of real, lasting change. Security cameras continued their silent vigil, recording the final hours of a day that had started with discrimination but was ending with determination. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathered crowd, illuminating faces filled with purpose and hope for a better tomorrow. 1 year later, Maya stood in her boutique's expanded space, surrounded by photographs from that transformative day. The incident that could have broken her spirit had instead sparked a movement that changed their community forever. The enlarged security camera image from that morning hung prominently near the entrance, a reminder of how far they'd come. The police department had completely reformed its training program. Officer Collins, surprisingly, had become one of its most passionate advocates. He now led workshops for fellow officers, using his own experience to teach about unconscious bias and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. The young girl who had witnessed everything that day was now a regular visitor to the boutique. Maya had started a mentorship program for young aspiring entrepreneurs, teaching them not just about business, but about standing up for themselves with grace and strength. The boutique had become more than a high-end clothing store. It was a symbol of community triumph. Regular customers now included people from all walks of life, each drawn not just by the fashion, but by the story of transformation that the space represented. Mr. Paddle's coffee shop and Maya's boutique had collaborated to create a monthly community forum. Business owners gathered to share experiences, offer support, and continue building the bridges that had begun forming that fateful morning. The meetings always ended with Mrs. Chen sharing wisdom from her decades of experience. The security cameras that had captured the original incident now recorded a different story, one of inclusion, respect, and community. The footage from that day had become part of police training programs across the country, helping other departments learn from their community's experience. Annie had been promoted to Community Outreach Director, a position created specifically to maintain the momentum of change. Her database of experiences had grown into a national resource, helping other communities address similar challenges. The council members' hastily drafted proposal had evolved into comprehensive legislation, setting new standards for police interaction with business owners. Other cities had begun adopting similar measures, creating a ripple effect of positive change. Through the boutique's windows, Maya could see the transformed shopping district. Signs in various languages welcomed everyone. Security officers greeted people with genuine warmth, and the community's diversity was celebrated rather than suspected. The spring collection that had been forgotten that day had eventually debuted, but with a special twist. Maya had collaborated with local designers of various backgrounds, creating a line that celebrated their community's rich diversity. It had sold out within days. The teacher who had witnessed everything with her daughter had integrated the story into her curriculum. Students now learned about community activism through a local lens, understanding how small moments of courage could lead to lasting change. Maya's phone still held the photos from that morning, but they were now balanced by images of progress, community celebrations, award ceremonies, and most importantly, faces of young entrepreneurs following their dreams without fear of prejudice. The vintage clock that had marked the hours of that transformative day still ticked steadily, now witnessing a different kind of daily routine, one where respect and understanding had become the norm rather than the exception. The crystal chandeliers that had illuminated that day's events now shone over a space that truly welcomed everyone. The boutique's success had grown beyond fashion, becoming a beacon of hope and change in their community. As evening approached, Maya watched the usual mix of customers browsing her collections. The security cameras recorded a normal day of business, but she never forgot how those same cameras had captured a moment that changed everything. Outside, the sun set on a transformed community. The candlelight vigil that had marked that first evening had become an annual celebration of unity and progress. People gathered not in protest, but in celebration of how far they'd come. The security footage from that morning was now preserved in the city's historical archives, alongside documentation of the changes it had inspired. What had started as a moment of discrimination had become a testament to the power of community and the possibility of real change. Maya straightened the display, just as she'd been doing that morning a year ago. But now, as she worked, she saw not just her reflection in the window, but the reflection of a community forever changed by the courage to stand up and the wisdom to transform conflict into progress.